For years, Christians have been told, stay out of the political arena, separation of church and state and all that jazz. But is that the case? And if so, then why are we seeing a resurgence of Christian conservatives, not only in the culture, but in public policy? Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world. Well, what does that mean, Brian? Well, that means if you want to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure, improve your pump at the gym, just like I did. Well, all you gotta do is stick around. We're going to talk about Cardio Miracle later in today's episode. Or if you're super duper interested to hit pause, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And you're going to know you're in the right spot because on your homepage, you're going to see a little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols, which means you're going to get 15% off your order, folks. I've been using Cardio Miracle for 2+ years now. I've seen the benefit in my own life. It's actually funny. I was just talking with my wife the other day. We're walking around the house and I'm just going, oh my God, I'm so cold. Like, why am I so cold? I'm trying to think back, like over the past few years, I've gotten cold. She goes, yeah, it's when your blood pressure got under control. So then you start taking Cardio Miracle. And I just started to laugh. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly it. So I cannot say it's a super drug. I cannot say it's the solution to all your problems, but I've seen the benefits myself, and I know you will too. So one more time, cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. But let's jump from the heart health conversation into the nation's health, the cultural heart health of our world and of our country. And that is right now a resurgence, it seems like, at least across from the more conservative Christian right. And it gets me the warm and fuzzies. I talk about this in the customer experience world, my other podcast, CX Without the BS, but the warm and fuzzy meter, right? You can't really put it into a number, but you certainly feel it. But oh, by the way, there is numbers, polling showing that more and more Christians are starting to come out of the woodwork and say, hey, we're here. And we're not silent anymore. But hey, you've been told if you're a Christian, don't talk politics, especially if you're a man, because that means that you the patriarchy on your side, your toxic masculinity, all that nonsense. So what does it look like being a Christian man in today's 2026, oh my goodness, era and beyond? Joining me here to discuss all that and more is Bryce Eddy. Bryce, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Hey, Brian, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you on the show. You can tell you have the fancy microphone, which means that you are likely a fellow traveler in the podcasting space, which of course you are. So do us a favor before we dig into today's conversation. Introduce yourself and who is Bryce Eddy and this Bryce Eddy podcast, this Bryce Eddy show I've been hearing about.
Yeah, so it's really fun. The other day I was outed as the president of one of Charlie Kirk's boards on some other podcast, and they were like, who is this guy and how does he have time for all of these things? Obviously he's got to be a Fed, because I am a many-layered onion and I do have a lot going on. I do have a show on Salem's Podcast Network. I used to own a jiu-jitsu school, which I just sold recently. I've been in the insurance space for many, many years as an insurance broker. I am in the midst of launching a cigar brand and, about 10 other things that I'm doing. And life is pretty fantastic. But yes, I am busy. My nickname is Super Bryce for a reason. And I love the nature and tag of your show in terms of, educating people, because I think that's what we're lacking right now. If you're following what's happening with Venezuela or, anything in the news right now, we have a perverted or messed up worldview where people just don't understand what's happening. And I think, like you, I want to get the word out. And I want to get people to understand things in the, multiple dimensions and through a Christian lens. And I think life will be better if, people come our way.
Yeah, well, and let's start here, right? Because the Christian lens, this is something I've heard in more secular conversations. It shouldn't be allowed in public discourse, Bryce. I remember back in college, one political science professor who I actually am quite fond of, but he would always go in this mantle of arguing separation of church and state until he was blue in the face. And I said, listen, you can have separation of church and state, but that doesn't stop the freedom of expression of members of the state. I'm sorry, like you can still express your faith. And oh, by the way, just elephant in the room, all the public policy that you love to talk about in class, professor, is built on our Christian morals and Christian traditions, right? That's how we built the country we have today, is on our Christian heritage. And that can't be ignored. And I think where we are today, there's a lot more folks in our camp who are more confidently and loudly saying, no, sorry, you can argue freedom of expression and to the point of saying separation of church and state until you're blue in the face, but we're not going anywhere. We're here, we're Christian, we're loud, we're proud, and we're going to profess the love and the beauty of Jesus Christ as our Savior. And you know what? There's nothing you can do about it. And this is something I'm seeing, especially in Gen Z, Bryce. And I want to talk about Gen Z to start here. Gen Z is starting to come back towards more of a Christian ethos, especially Gen Z men. And you're working a lot more with Turning Point, to your point, right? So what are you hearing? Boots on the ground, this Gen Z going to Gen Alpha? What? Voter base that's going to be here in the next few years, believe it or not, folks. But they're voting more and more Christian. Is that the case? Is that what we're hearing? Is that actually being reaffirmed with what you're seeing boots on the ground?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Charlie was very proud of is it was his work that made a massive difference. And I don't think people understood how dramatic his impact was on the culture, and particularly young men. Our culture had been so unmoored for so long. Your professor, and I want to be nice, had an idiotic worldview, as if you could divorce ideology from politics, if you could be this like blank slate, uninformed by anything in your life, and just walk in and make any sort of political decision is absurd. And so the idea, of course, of separation of church and state was not our founding fathers' idea. Our founding fathers' idea was that we were a Christian nation. And Charlie articulated that beautifully. And you can look at all of the state constitutions and everything that affirmed that belief going back to the founding of our country. Our founding fathers just didn't want a national church. They, came from England. They came from that oppression. They wanted people to freely express their religion. But we weren't supposed to be religion free, because there will always be a religious ideology that reigns supreme. Over the last few decades, it's been a secular humanism. It's been a collectivism. It's still a religious ideology. And I want ours to be in charge, because that's how you have happy lives. You don't have happy lives when you have Islam in charge. You don't have happy lives when you have the secular humanists or the communists in charge either. And there's all sorts of evidence, chief of which being the prosperity that we've had here, and how free people are here to express themselves in any way they really want.
I was just thinking back to when I was in college, and the secular mentality, it really was, it still is predominant in our culture, but it was at that height, right, in the 2010s. And I saw it firsthand where, like, there was one, I forget the specific example, Bryce, but there was some instance where there was Amnesty International, and it was a student organization that was on campus, and they were trying to do something for some dude who'd actually done something quite obviously like wrong. And I think it was rape, actually. And he was trying being extradited or something. It was some stupid thing, right? And all the campus lefties and Amnesty International were like, we're marching for him, like, and, bringing their protest signs and shit. And I remember sitting there, I'm on the student government, and I'm like, no, this is wrong. What are we doing? Like, this guy's a bad guy. Like, and I felt weird saying that. And what held me back, and I think what held a lot of men back during that era, was this whole thing of, well, you're a man, and you need to sit down and shut up, right? Like, you can't mansplain anymore. You're toxic. What is toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more men are toxic when they don't have masculinity. At least that's my experience. But Bryce, like, talk to us about what you're seeing as the real manifestation of masculinity and how it's becoming more okay to be a man, be a guy in 2026?
Yeah, well, it's funny because weak men are actually dangerous, and weak men are
Jordan Peterson's
ineffective.
approach, right?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, Jordan Peterson says, and I think it's beautifully expressed: be dangerous and have it under voluntary control. And we've lost that, and the idea that you cannot have a patriarchy or somehow the patriarchy can be disassembled or something like that is absurd on its face. Men can collectively oppress other men. Men can collectively oppress women. Women cannot oppress men, and they imagine that there's this world in which men are going to step aside until they realize that you would have to enforce things, and then you're going to need men to do it.
You're trying to stay sharp, whether it's for work, learning, or just not forgetting where you left your keys. Been there. But lately, the mental fog hits hard. And brain fog isn't just stress. It's often tied to poor blood flow and low nitric oxide levels because your brain needs oxygen just as much as your other muscles do. Because without it, you're slower to process, less focused, and more fatigued. And that's one of the many reasons why I trust Cardio Miracle. Not only does it boost nitric oxide for heart and circulation, it supports cognitive clarity, focus, and even mood regulation thanks to its unique blend of L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3, and antioxidant-rich superfoods. So if you're tired of feeling mentally cloudy, give your brain what it's craving. Click the link in the show notes, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, which will give you 15% off your order. Just look for the little note on the website saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
And so what we want is good men to be in control. We want kind men to be in control. I talk a lot to people about the idea of nice versus kind. Nice is a harmless weakness. That's just an ineffective person who has no real strength. Being kind is a deliberate choice that comes from a position of strength, and we want kind men to be in charge. And we are seeing these young men that have just felt this hollow culture wanting to be strong again and recognizing that. And Charlie was hugely effective in getting young men to have the talking points and to understand what's going on. But for decades, we got to a point where we were talking about men can get pregnant. I mean, how do you get to a point in culture where people with a straight face will say, oh no, men can get pregnant? I mean, it's absolutely absurd, and it only came from men being sort of stripped over time of their strength. That is returning now, and you're seeing young men flocking to the Reformed Church or Latin masses or even Eastern Orthodox is growing tremendously. Now, competing with that because people are needing something strong again is Islam. It's on a tremendous rise. And we are in a competition against good versus evil in this world, and we want Christian young men to rise.
Why is there such a pushback against Christianity? Is it to the unseen realm battle that has been going on for eternity of good versus evil? Is that what we're seeing is the manifestation of that good and evil in our physical realm that has been battling for years? Is that what it is?
Oh, for sure. At its core, that'll never go away. I mean, that is the sort of lasting battle, but you're seeing a pushback largely because of Christians. People are angry with other Christians. People who've been done wrong by their, relatives, their, mother, father, aunt, uncle, priest, pastor. They've seen poor examples. I mean, I've been a poor example, in my life. There's been all kinds of that. And if you're looking at me or you're looking at you and Brian, you're probably perfect. But if we're looking at us,
I wish.
yeah, for the answers, Jesus and God is the answer, not a person, not a human
Yeah.
being. And so a lot of people will be frustrated by a Christian in their life that harmed or hurt them. And because we still are, by the numbers dominant in our culture, they'll look at us and they'll be, oh, I hate those Christians. Oh, I hate God, all this stuff, and walk away from that. But then they'll celebrate Maduro or, be whining over Maduro getting arrested by the Trump administration. I mean, how do we have these people glomming on to a guy like that and condemning, Christians on the other hand, or, saying, oh, it's a war crime that they went and got the guy. No, they, convened a grand jury to go get him. But anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but that's what we're seeing.
No, I appreciate it. It is funny. I just did an episode. It was like 2 years ago now, which it feels like it was just yesterday. But it was to not argue with don't argue with donkeys, even when they say the sky is green. And I did this whole episode about this, the old fable of there was a donkey who kept on saying that the sky was green. And this one guy, just kept on going crazy. Like, no, it's blue, obviously. Right. And just like exhausting himself. And the donkey was able to make it further in the journey because the other guy had exhausted himself trying to tell the donkey how wrong he was. And the donkey knows he's wrong. He doesn't care. Right. He's trying to get you to be tired. And that's what we see is a lot of Christians. And by the way, that's just in general on the right. We end up getting much more stuck in this mentality of I want to be right than effective. And that right there, I mean, that speaks to why we took such an approach here in the show where we're trying to sell our politics and not in the slimy, sleazy type of like used car salesman perspective that a lot of folks have with sales, but true solution-based selling where you see people who have problems or are trying to get, from point A to point C in a much better tangible situation. Like that's where you're doing real value add. And that's a good thing. And that's something we should be bringing when we're trying to recruit more folks to the movement instead of spending time going after folks who quite obviously are not our target market, wasting our time, energy, and effort trying to tell them that the sky is blue. And then meanwhile, surprised when they have a ground game that it blows us away when it comes, time for election season. And we're like, how? Our ideas are better. We're so right. What? Why are we losing? It's like, well, while you were telling them that they were wrong and trying to engage in a debate, which don't get me wrong, there's a time and place for debate, they were out actually meeting people where they're at. In this case, they actually go out, do a really good job knocking on doors. The left has an amazing ground game. They were built up as community organizers. This is their jam. And then we're surprised when the election results come in. And despite our ideas being objectively correct and better relative to our friends on the loony left, we end up, if not like many instances, tying or barely winning every now and then, or outright losing, right? Because it's not always the electoral outcomes, it's the policy. Like we see leftists get elected as Republicans. I see that in my home state in Indiana here. Well, it's not my home state, it's my Hoosier state. They've adopted me, Bryce, is what I'm trying to say. But like I'm seeing that where there's a lot of Republicans who they tout the GOP and the red team as though they're one of us. And then they go and they do like progressive goofball stuff. And I'm like, what? No, that's not what this is for. So Bryce, I say all that, like, I see the problem. You see the problem. How do we continue to get more and more folks aware as we are to the problem so we can actually continue to make some real substantive changes, like in the actual positive direction? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm contemplating that here. I do my little, year-end planning, and then start off the new year with a bang. And I've been thinking about that myself because I've gotten caught up a lot, especially post Charlie's death, where people were coming out and saying ludicrous things about his beliefs or calling him a racist. And listen, I have been effective in persuading people otherwise when it was a relational thing. And when I was using more of a persuasive technique versus just, you're wrong, you're an idiot, go to hell. That's not the, that's not the approach that is helpful to you. It's not helpful to them. And you're right. They're not always the target market, or they're lying about things intentionally because they've got, either they're Candace Owens just trafficking in clicks and, pretending that she and Charlie were still very close and, playing games and knowing that they're lying. I mean, that's what a lot of people do. But I think we need to take that more persuasive. Here's a great idea and why it works. I've realized years ago that the sincere liberals and conservatives have a lot in common in terms of we all pretty much can identify the same problems, right? Okay, homelessness is not a good thing. Yes, homelessness is not a good thing. All right, then what do we do about it? Now, they've got terrible ideas, and they've got terrible ideas that tend to exasperate the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And many of their ideas are built upon a false compassion or a suicidal empathy, where they end up, creating an even bigger mess. So we need to take these young kids, and this is what Charlie did beautifully, is he took these young men and these young college students, and he armed them with rational policy, good arguments, laid it out in a very compelling way. And then, you had people running around, wearing Turning Point hats and going to all of his events wherever he was. And that made a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I'm seeing a change because of the thing that Charlie started, right? And like, yes, the culture has changed dramatically over the past few years, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I have to go back to Charlie as kind of the North Star for the general conservative movement, because the reality is for really a number of years, the conservative movement was very much like this corporatist establishment kind of like hoity-toity movement. The left pretended to be the movement of the blue collar person, the average person, right? And what happened was, as the years progressed, the left was continuing to tout that as their narrative, but while they were doing so, completely changing what they were actually promoting, right? In much more leftist progressive ideologies. So you look at that, and then on the right, folks were saying a lot more in this Trumpist movement, saying, no, you know what? Like, maybe it's time to get rid of this donor class. That's why Trump, candidly, was able to win in 2015, was because in South Carolina, he called out Jeb Bush to his face and his entire donor base's faces there at the debate, and saying, like, you're all of his donors, right? That's why you're booing me. And by the way, it's how you had to get in here to the debate stage, was if you want to be the theater, you had to be a donor, right? Like, and that was the narrative he was promoting. And you see all of a sudden the GOP has, whether it's actually doing it yet, is become a party much more of a normal, average, everyday kind of person. And I think that's an objectively good thing. I think we're in a much better spot. But now, much like in Trump's art of the deal, you got to follow through, right? Like, you can't just, make them feel warm and fuzzy. You got to deliver the goods.
Level 365 gives you real US-based support from real people who know the platform. So help is always easy to reach. Whether you need answers, changes, or troubleshooting, you'll talk to someone who can actually help. And as your business evolves, support scales with you. It's all powered by one dependable UC platform. Learn more at level365.com.
And that's the part I'm nervous about. I don't know if the GOP is ready to deliver the goods, but if we continue to embrace more of a Christian ethos, Bryce, I think we're in a better spot. So what are your thoughts in terms of actually using religion, in this case, Christianity, to help get positive public policy into action that will tangibly move things and deliver the goods?
Yeah, well, we need a revival, because you do have to have people who, believe in our ideology, right? And that's how you're going to succeed ultimately, because we can't by fiat take we the people and, force a Christian nation upon them, right? Christians need to be involved in politics, because politics is just, at its simplest definition, the way we organize ourselves. And we somehow got convinced, and you mentioned the tax exempt status, the Johnson administration put in the Johnson Amendment, which gave a tax write-off for contributions to a church and created the not-for-profit status and all of that. And then, the hook there was, okay, don't talk about politics. And people, in exchange for that tax exempt status, I mean, it was a master stroke of Satan to do that. All of these pastors shut up, and they didn't talk about the obvious things that were going on in our culture and the obvious things that needed to be talked about. And thankfully, there's been a lot of pastors that have shined that law on and just gone full steam ahead. And we've seen that particularly during COVID. We saw a lot of churches stand up and say, no, now we're fighting. And I think that was one of the best things that happened to us. But we need a focus and an emphasis on, here are the policies that are in line with Christian faith. Hey, let's not let these disastrous things in. Let's pay attention. And the more we do that, along with this kind of revival that's happening in our youth, I think the kids are all right. And I think we're going to be okay. But it needs to be continuing on. And you were right about the Democrats sold this idea, hey guys, we're in charge. We're going to pat you on the head. We're for the little guy. And they never really were. I mean, there's so much more elite money involved in Democrat politics and involved in pushing collectivism.
But
and
perception is reality.
Order. That's right. And so, we got to get back to, like your show suggests, selling our great policies, because our ideas and our policies are much more pragmatic. They actually work. They're much better for everyone. And, we can't let the people with the soft hearts and the soft brains dictate things anymore.
Bryce, we are unfortunately getting towards the end of the show, which is where we start to wrap things up, do some final thoughts. I'll kick things off. I'll let you bring us home today. But, this is one thing I've been talking more and more openly about is my faith. And it's interesting. For the past 10 years, it's not that I haven't been religious or I haven't had faith, but rather was very confused of how to articulate it without being shut down in modern discourse. And what I realized as I prayed and started to talk to more folks and just kind of realize the truth, and that is there's never going to be a good time. You just got to speak out, right? You have to speak the truth, even when it's going to be uncomfortable, because there's never going to be the good time, right? I tell this to businesses when I'm going through and I'm consulting with them from a go-to-market strategy standpoint. I'm like, listen, there's no good time to change a go-to-market strategy. I get that, but you got to. So let's rip the Band-Aid off and address now your market's changed and you're trying to sell ice to Eskimos. Guys, they don't need it. They have ice, right? Let's stop trying to force the square peg through the round hole. And, I say all that. I'm thinking we're getting to a point now where it's much more accepted culturally to profess your faith. I remember, Bryce, when I was in college, there was a Christian fellowship group. It's like 6 kids. And they were always kind of looked at by folks as the goofballs. And that breaks my heart. But yet I look at that same organization today and they're one of the biggest groups on campus. And I'm like, wow, 15 years. That's what happened. And if it continues this way, again, I'm from upstate New York. I saw the Amish culture. They've moved up there. They're taking over. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but they're more or less taking over at this point. And by, I think the estimates were 2050, they're going to be over 35% of the voting base in upstate New York because they're having kids and the left isn't. They're just not. And if we continue this progression, and if more and more of the folks in the right continue to raise their kids in much more of this Christian ethos, Bryce, I think you're right. The future looks bright. These kids, they're all right. So that's my final thoughts. Bryce, bring us home. What do you want folks to take away from today's conversation? And of course, if they enjoyed hearing you here in the Brian Nichols Show, where can they go ahead and find your podcast? Bryce, floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'll say one thing really quick. God calls us to be bold and not timid. And I think it was a timid, feminized Christianity that lost us the leadership in our culture. And so I'm a combat sports athlete. I think, just like you're out there working out, get healthy, get bold, be one of those people that walks tall, shoulders back, and is not timid about your faith. And you will change the people around you. And let's stop having that effeminate Christianity reign supreme. No more nice guys. And I think we'll make a much bigger impact. And I'm going to see that. If you're interested in listening to me, it's the Bryce Eddy Show. I'm on all the podcast apps. I'm on Rumble. If you want to follow what I am doing, or, see me argue with people sometimes uselessly, and I'm working on being more effective there, you can follow my Instagram at Super Bryce Eddy. Or Bryce Eddy 1 on the artist formerly known as Twitter.
I just finished listening to the audiobook of Elon Musk, and his purchase of Twitter is a part of that conversation, and his transformation
book,
of it.
By the way, yeah,
it is phenomenal. Yeah, Walter Isaacson is one of my favorite biographers.
Agreed.
He's so down the middle. He's so fair. I listened to that one recently. Re-listened to Steve Jobs, which I like the audiobook version. I find I absorb more when I listen versus just sitting and reading. So it almost felt like a different story, if that makes sense, listening to it versus when I had read the biography. And granted, the biography was a while ago, like probably 5-10 years ago at this point. But anyways, neither here nor there. No, I was just listening to the Elon Musk one, and he was talking about the transformation from X to Twitter. And like, I will say that's the one part broke my heart, man. Twitter was such a great brand to have. And then hey, I get it though. He wanted X to be his thing, like the X everything app, but I think it was Peter Thiel had made a remark like, Elon, it's kind of hard to sell X.com as family friendly, but different conversation for a different day. Bryce Eddy, thank you for joining us here on the show, folks. If you got some value from today's episode, you know the drill. Go ahead, give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at @BNicholsLiberty on, X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As for the Brian Nichols Show, you can find us on your favorite podcast or video platform. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or you go to Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, X, wherever it is. Just hit subscribe, because every Monday, Thursday, and Friday nights, we have a brand new episode air at 9 p.m. Eastern. And to Bryce's point, I guarantee each one should leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. Bryce, any final words before we go ahead and say goodbye today?
Hey, just thank you for having me, Brian. I appreciate you. This was fun.
Likewise, thank you for joining the show. And with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show for Bryce Eddy. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.